Good evening, everyone. And it's wonderful to see so many old friends and lots of new friends joining us tonight. I'm Jinzhao Li, Director of Cambridge China Center. I would like to welcome everybody warmly to This is China Wine Talks, which is part of the 2-month festival, China Weeks 2021, curated by the China National Tourist Office in London and partners. And talking about wine, China is regarded as a new world wine region. However, we know that China has been producing wine since the Han Dynasty, which is about 2,000 years ago. And now China has the second largest vineyard area in the world, just after Spain. And China is the 10th largest wine producing country. Some people say 8th or 9th is ever changing. And also China is the 6th largest wine consuming country worldwide. Really, we should say China is an old new world wine region. And tonight, the topic is a brief history of Chinese wines. Our acclaimed wine speaker and wine author, Jenny Wang, will lead the discussion on the history of Chinese wines. But it's not only about Chinese wines, it's about thousands of years of Chinese history and culture. Like yourself, I'm really looking forward to it. And the audience are muted at the moment. We will activate everybody's audio and video at the later part of the webinar so we can carry on chatting and drinking if you have a glass of wine in hand. Okay, let's welcome Jenny Wang and hope you all enjoy the wine talk tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jinzhao, for that very generous introduction. And it's my great pleasure tonight to talk about Chinese wine, but from a cultural and historical perspective. And in fact, for anybody who's interested to learn about Chinese history and culture, wine is actually a very nice point to enjoy with a glass of wine and talk about wine perspectives within the Chinese historical context. So today, the topic is going to cover several thousand years. So it will be a whirlwind tour. So let's get started. So a brief history of Chinese wine, 中国葡萄酒简史. So you'll notice I will annotate some of my presentation with the Chinese characters and also the pinyin. So for those of you who are learning Chinese, I hope this may also be helpful to you. Right, so we know Jinzhao in the introduction mentioned that grape wine was produced in China since the Han Dynasty, which is already 2,000 years ago, right? But if we go back even further in history, the oldest finding of fermented beverage of any kind in the world, so far at least, was found in China as well. So this was found in a site near Henan province called the Jiahu Wenhua, a Neolithic site. And so some wine pots were discovered there dating back 9,000 years ago. And the contents of these pots were analyzed. And what they found was the wine could have been made from some type of wild fruit. So it could have been wild grapes or wild hawthorn, but there were also contents like grain, rice, so and honey, right? So it was almost like a cocktail of different ingredients fermented into a very early alcohol, right? So that dates back 9,000 years. By the way, I also put some book references in case you're interested to read about it more later in my book, which is called The Chinese Wine Renaissance. So throughout the slides, there might be some book references for you as well. And then if we look at some written records about mentions of grape or of wine, this early poem from a collection called the Book of Odes, 诗经, right? So this dates back to first millennium BC. And in this particular poem called the seventh month, it mentions the agricultural year and what is being harvested and consumed throughout certain months of the year. And here it mentioned that in the 6th month, and actually that would refer to August, right? Wild grapes are eaten. So yu, this mention of yu highlighted here, is the first written record of wild grapes. But here it seems that people would harvest the ripened grapes and just simply eat them. Because later on it mentions that in the 10th month, which will be December, actually the harvest of rice is made into wine, right? So there's a distinction between grapes being eaten and grains being made into wine. So this could be a clue for us that actually at this point in time, grain-based wine was the predominant type of alcoholic beverage, whereas grapes were still predominantly wild and eaten as a fruit. And another interesting point here is that the wine is made for spring consumption, 春酒, so springtime, spring wine. So you can imagine when the grains are harvested later towards the end of the year, the wine is then aged for a few months only and ready for springtime. 春酒 later on also started to appear in references relating to the spring festival. So 春酒 became a term later on to describe fairly young and recently made wine, right, to be consumed around spring or the Chinese New Year period. And then it goes on to say that the wine is made as a tribute for the bushy-eyebrowed one. So obviously someone senior, someone elderly in the community. And this wine was presented to this elder and senior person to wish him longevity, right? So there's an association already here between wine and health. And that is a thing that you will see recurring in Chinese wine culture, is this close relationship between wine and health and health-giving properties. Right? So this poem is very interesting. It tells us quite a lot of facts about wine culture back in the first millennium BC in China. So in the meantime, the European wine grape, right, the Vitis vinifera, 欧洲酿酒葡萄, began to spread across the Mediterranean as well. So European wine culture was also starting to flourish around the Mediterranean. And even today, wine as we know it, grape wine, are made with European grapevines, Vitis vinifera. So now let's go back to the first mention in written record about grape wine coming into China. And that is really related, linked to the story of the Silk Road. And Han Wudi, the Emperor Wudi of Han Dynasty, commissioned an expedition towards the west of China in order to discover the lands and the people out there, and hoping to forge some kind of political and military alliances, and also to establish trading relationships. And hence the Silk Road was established over time. And here, the three key figures we need to know are Han Wudi, the emperor, who commissioned the exploration, and Zhang Qian, who was the diplomat who led the expedition, the explorer. And then, of course, the reason why we know these stories is thanks to Sima Qian, the court historian, who recorded all these journeys in his book called The Records of the Grand Historian, which was one of the most important and famous historical works of China. Right. So in this Records of the Grand Historian, Sima Qian wrote about grape wine being something produced around this region called Dayuan. So Dayuan is Fergana, which is present-day Uzbekistan, right? So he mentioned that in this region called Yuan, grapes are used for wine, and the Han envoy brought back the specimens. And what's interesting, he then goes on to say that the emperor was the first to plant the grapevines in the palace. So he was very interested as a early winemaker. And Book of Han, another very important historical record, also mentioned that the grape wine from this Fergana region, actually the wealthy people would store them in the home, and they can be kept for decades, right? So this is interesting because we know that the best wines are cellar worthy, they're age worthy, they can be kept for a long time and enjoyed over a long time, and good wine would develop interesting characters over time. So what's very fascinating here is that back in the Han Dynasty, already people towards the west in the Fergana region were already making wines of very good quality that could be kept and aged, right? So wine aging was already very much in vogue among the wealthy during those days. And in the meantime, of course, we have Cato the Elder, who's also writing about viticulture in the Agricultura, right? And he also interestingly talked about the medicinal qualities of wine. So here you can see between the East and the West, around the same time, they were coming up with similar ideas about wine, the viticulture aspect, and also the health-giving aspect of wine. Right, so this is very fascinating to see the parallel progress in the East and in the West. But of course, at this time, wine was very expensive. It was the preserve of royalty and the upper class, right? So we saw Han Wudi, the emperor himself, enjoyed wine. But grape wine was not something that was widely available in society. So just to illustrate how valuable wine was, towards the end of the Han Dynasty, there was a very powerful and corrupt eunuch, and he was in charge of basically naming ministers, right, assigning powerful roles. So a guy called Meng Tuo bribed this eunuch with 20 liters of grape wine. And in exchange for this bribe, he was given a ministerial post of Liangzhou, right? Liangzhou is around the size of New Zealand, and at the time had a population around 1 million people. So with 26 bottles of wine, this guy managed to get a ministerial post for a place the size of New Zealand. So that gives you a sense of how valuable and how rare grape wine was at the time, right? So these days we still use this phrase, 一斗得两周, meaning 20 liters of wine gets you in exchange for the state of Liangzhou. So if you come across a very, very, very good wine, you might pay a compliment to this wine and say, well, you know, this wine is worth posting Liangzhou. That would be the ultimate compliment to a Chinese wine, I suppose. And then after the Han Dynasty fell, China entered into a period called the Three Kingdoms. So you might have heard of this period because there's a very famous novel called The Romance of the Three Kingdoms that talks about the stories and the heroes of this period. And one of my favorite tasting notes from Chinese history came from one of the key characters of the Three Kingdom period, and he was the emperor of Wei, Cao Pi. So Cao Pi once wrote to his physicians, the court physicians, Zhao Qunyi, he said in his edict to his physicians that grape wine is really a wonderful thing because it's sweet but not cloying, it's acidic but not sharp, it's cooling but not cold, it's long in taste and abundant in juice, right? So that sounds to me like the perfect grape wine. You know, that sounds to me like a perfectly balanced, well-made wine. And he goes on to say that wine inebriates well, yet sobers up easily. Again, that is a very comfortable way to get drunk. You know, you're comfortably drunk and you sobers up easily. So to me, that's the golden standard of making a perfect grape wine. And also, I think it's the best tasting notes in Chinese history. So Cao Pi here, if you play computer games, there are lots of computer games around the Three Kingdom period, and you might recognize this character as the more handsome rendition on the right rather than the official portrait on the left. So in the meantime, the oak barrel became more widely spread and used by the Romans to not just to transport wine, but also to store wine as well. Because the Romans discovered that actually oak barrels not only are a better way to store wine, but it also imparted interesting characters and desirable characters to the wine, right? So oak barrel aging gradually started to be used by winemakers as well, right? So 橡木桶 oak barrels started to become more popular during this time as well. Right, so we have to fast forward a bit because today we only have time for a very fast tour of Chinese history. So we go to the Tang Dynasty, right? One of the most celebrated, most famous period in Chinese history. And the one of the Tang legacy to us is the poetry. Tang poetry is famous throughout the world. And the person who is perhaps the most representative of Tang Dynasty poetry is Li Bai, right? Li Bai is one of our most celebrated poet. And he's also loved for his incredible love for wine, in fact. So we have a saying that Li Bai imports wine and outpours poetry, right? He must be inspired by wine before he can write. So among his many poems dedicated to wine, today I want to talk about introduce you to a poem that's not very well known, but it talks about grape wine in particular. So I thought this is very interesting to show us a glimpse into Tang Dynasty grape wine characters, right? So this is Xiangyang Ge by Li Bai, and I have made a translation of the poem. So Li Bai talked about looking out to the Han River, right? So this is what he sees as scenery. And then he imagines if the green color of the Han River, like the green color of the duck's head, that's the color of unfiltered grape wine, right? So that's quite a beautiful and intense color. And possibly, what could possibly look like that? It would have been sort of an unfiltered wine, right? So it still has a lot of lees and sediments in this wine. And then he goes on to say, if the whole river was actually spring wine, then the lees and the sediments would build a mound, right? So that seems to be a highly desirable image to him. And this poem is interesting for several things. First of all, it mentions grape wine. Then it tells us the color of the wine that he's enjoying, and also it's unfiltered. And also he mentions lees and sediment, right? So lees, as we understand, is something that it's essentially the enzymes, but also in Chinese history, what we understand to be lees is this thing called qu, right? Qu is more than just yeasts, right? It's also complicated microbial complex that kickstart the fermentation process, which is more commonly found in rice wine making, right? In rice wine making, we would use qu. So in Li Bai's poem, what is suggested here is that with grape wine making, sometimes this qu is also added, right? So this suggests that grape wine making by Tang Dynasty was already using certain indigenous methods as well. So not just the natural fermentation, yeast fermentation that is common in Europe, right? So European wine making is essentially a natural fermentation process, whereas Chinese traditional and grain wine making would add this fermentation starter called qu, right? So from this poem, Li Bai is telling us something about the winemaking process as well in Tang Dynasty, right? So that's a very insightful piece of poetry. And if we talk about Tang Dynasty, we also must talk about Lady Yang, Yang Guifei. She really represents the pinnacle of the grandeur and luxury of High Tang Dynasty. So at the time, Tang Dynasty was the most prosperous metropolis of the world, right? This is where, this was the center of the world in terms of wealth, commerce, multiculturalism, right? So Tang Dynasty was at the height at this period, and Yang Guifei was perhaps the most celebrated beauty of the day, and in fact of Chinese history. She's known as one of the 4 most beautiful ladies in Chinese history. So this particular excerpt here was taken from a preface to a collection of poems written actually by Li Bai, dedicated to the beauty of Lady Yang, right? So Lady Yang was the beloved wife of the emperor. And one day, the emperor and Lady Yang was in the palace enjoying wine, enjoying the scenery, and looking at flowers. And the emperor wanted some music. And he said, well, we're looking at such beautiful scenes. We have such a beautiful lady. We must have new lyrics to the songs. So he summoned Li Bai to the palace to produce several poems on the spot so that Lady Yang could set the lyrics to song and to dance to the music. So this depicted a beautiful scene of impromptu music making, poetry making, dancing, and wine drinking, right? So it's a scene of decadence, but also of culture, right? This is the artistry of music and poem and dancing and wine, all weave together in an impromptu setting. So this preface specifically mentioned that Lady Yang was holding a very valuable wine glass, which was studded with 7 treasures, right? And she was enjoying the wine of Liangzhou grape wine. And she was dancing, singing, and the emperor also improvised on his jade flute to accompany her songs. So from this very beautiful scene, we then have also poems from the Tang Dynasty that depict far away at the border, the soldiers, the hardship of border patrolling soldiers, and occasionally they are called to war, with the steppes people who occasionally invade China from the grassland towards the north and the west. So here is a poem about the border soldiers' plight, but here you can see grape wine opens the scene for us. The first line of the poem talks about the fine grape wine glistens in the cup of evening light, right? Again, very beautiful. So even frontier soldiers, the comfort for them was wine, grape wine. And the soldier says that I wish to enjoy the wine alas the sound of pipa, which is a stringed instrument, summons for battle. So just as he was about to enjoy the wine, he was called to battle. And he goes on to say, if I should lie drunken on the battlefield, pray, sir, do not mock me. For since the time of old, how many do return from the frontiers of war, right? So it's a very touching poem, but it's also very telling for us to know that wine, since the Han Dynasty, as we were saying, that it was only enjoyed by royalty, but now you can see during Tang Dynasty, it was much more widely available and much loved, from royalty, from Lady Yang to poets, to the literati like Li Bai, to the frontier soldiers as well, right? So it's much, much more widespread. So meanwhile, Court and Charlemagne was founded in France. So the Roman Emperor Charlemagne gave a hill of Courton to the local abbey to produce wine. So today, of course, Courton Charlemagne is a very, very famous Burgundy region, famous for making Chardonnay white wines, right? And there's an interesting story about Charlemagne. He was known to enjoy wine, and he used to drink a lot of red wine. But unfortunately, his white beard would get stained with red wine, right? So his wife would complain that, you don't look like a king, with a red stained beard. So can't you make some white wine instead? So Charlemagne found this hill to have the right conditions, really good conditions to grow Chardonnay. So that's the legend behind Courton Charlemagne's legendary status as one of the best Chardonnay wine regions. So this was in parallel to the Tang Dynasty. Okay, so fast forward to the Song Dynasty, again, another height in terms of Chinese literature, right? So song lyrics to the Tang poetry, song lyrics were very famous. And one of the most celebrated lyricist or poet of the day was Su Dongpo, Su Shi, right? So here is an interesting little ode that he wrote, called the Ode to the Old Glutton, right? So Su Dongpo was famous for being a gourmand as well. He created a very famous triple cooked pork belly dish, right? So we call that Dongpo Rou, named after him. So he was all about the good food and good wine, and he said here, glassware from the South Seas is the thing for wine from Liangzhou. Again, Liangzhou is mentioned as a place that produced very high quality wine. And to go with high quality wine, you must use high quality glass, right? So he mentioned glassware from the South Seas, which implies that these were imported glass, right, from the seas. And in the meantime, around the Song Dynasty, there was a compilation of census in England called the Domesday Book, right? And interestingly, 42 vineyards were recorded in the Domesday Book, mostly located in southeastern coast of England. And of course, England is now also an exciting new wine regions, right? So China, the rise of China as a wine region is also coinciding with the rise of English wine culture as well, English wine making. And if we go back to the Domesday Book, we can also see England also had a bit of a history of winemaking. Right, so then we fast forward to Yuan Dynasty. So Yuan Dynasty was famous for operas. So opera and novels started to be written in vernacular Chinese around this period. So it became much more accessible to the masses, right? So opera houses were filled with people coming to watch music shows, acrobatic shows, great costumes, great music. And of course, on the tables of these patrons would be wine, and grape wine will be heavily featured around this time as well. So here I just show you a very famous painting of grape vine painted by Wen Zhiguan. And the story goes that Wen Zhiguan painted this while he was drunk. So one of his pupils observed him composing this drawing while he was drunk. And he said that the teacher, was so inspired by what he was drinking that he just did it in one sweep, no mistakes, just very sort of freehand drawing with the brush. As you can see from this painting, the shapes and the leaves and the fruits, they do sort of suggest a type of freedom and a type of impromptu type of expression, right? So apparently it was done while he was drunk on grape wine. And the other thing I want to mention was a book called The Collection of Agricultural Practices, published during the Yuan Dynasty. And here he mentioned the grapevine is not cold resistant by nature. If not buried, it will die. Why is this interesting? Because, of course, we know that in the modern Chinese wine industry, which tend to be dotted around the north of China, in many Chinese vineyards, we have to bury the vines in winter underground, right? Cover it with earth so that it can survive the cold and bitter and dry winter months. And of course, when we hear this, we think, wow, this is something new. I've never heard of this before. But what I would like to point out here is that actually this was exactly recorded in the Yuan Dynasty handbook for agriculture, right? It does say that grapevines in winter needs to be buried, right? So actually, none of this is very new to our ancestors. They've sussed it out a long time ago. And Yuan Dynasty, of course, was when Marco Polo came all the way to China and met Kublai Khan. And in Marco Polo's diary, there was lots of mentions about wines, good wines produced in Taiyuan. And also he talked about Kublai Khan's love for wine, grape wine, but also a type of horse milk, fermented horse milk, so called kumis, right? So during the Yuan Dynasty, grape wine and kumis were both court beverages, right? So Marco Polo wrote in his diary at length about how Kublai Khan would be served the wines in court. Right, so then we go on to Ming Dynasty. So by this time, grape wine was fairly well loved and understood in China. And in a very famous compendium of Chinese medicine called Ben Cao Gang Mu, written by a very famous Chinese doctor called Li Shizhen, he dedicated several sections to grape wine, how it's made, what's its quality and character, and also what is its health-giving properties. And also he warned that if you drink to excess, it's actually harmful for health as well. So he made a very good observation and quite a comprehensive entry around grape wine. And what's interesting was he mentioned there were 3 production methods for grape wine. One is the natural fermentation, which is the European winemaking tradition, as I was saying earlier, natural fermentation of the grape, right? And then he mentioned fermentation with inducer, which was what I described earlier when we talked about Li Bai's poem, right? So this is what we do with rice winemaking, grain winemaking in China. And also, of course, Japanese sake is made in a similar way using an inducer technology, right, to kickstart the fermentation. So that's interesting because fermentation with inducer is not something we do these days with grape wine, not even in China. And it would be really fascinating if we would maybe someone could try that and see what it tastes like, because I would be very fascinated, very interested to try that, right? And then he mentioned distillation, which is essentially brandy making, right? Distillation technology was very well understood and very popular by the Yuan dynasty already, and certainly in Ming dynasty. Distillation meant you can make higher alcohol liquors as well, which people started to enjoy more. Right, so in the meantime, Shakespeare was writing things like, "Good wine is a good familiar creature, if it be well used," in Othello. Right, so this has a bit of a parallel with what Li Shizhen was saying, that wine should be enjoyed in moderation, because if it's drunk to excess, it's bad for your health, right? And Shakespeare was, I suppose, a Ming dynasty contemporary who also talked about the wine needs to be well used, right? Okay, so we're now going to Qing dynasty, the very last dynasty of China. And here I want to mention Kangxi Emperor, right? So Kangxi Emperor was arguably one of the, well, he was the longest reigning emperor of China, a very illustrious emperor of China, and arguably the most multicultural in his outlook. So Kangxi was known to enjoy wine from Bordeaux, actually. So this is certainly a wine we would recognize today, right? Because in the court of Kangxi, he had many Jesuit missionaries who came to the court to tell him about the West. In particular, Kangxi struck up a friendship, or almost like a pen friend relationship with Louis XIV of France, right? They exchanged letters through these Jesuit missionaries, and they exchanged gifts. So Kangxi and Louis XIV had mutual admiration for each other's country and culture and civilization, right? And one of the missionary called Louis Lecomte, he was a mathematician from Bordeaux, and once Kangxi Emperor came down with an illness, and Louis Lecomte suggested to Kangxi that he should drink a glass of red wine every day with his meal. And so Kangxi followed this advice, and he recovered and thought, wow, this is great. And so he then kept this habit of drinking a glass of red wine, a French red wine, I would imagine, because Louis Lecomte was from Bordeaux. So he kept up this habit for the rest of his life. And he was, of course, one of the longest reigning emperor of China. So again, you see this association between wine and health playing out again, right? It was a great endorsement from the Emperor of China, the longest living, longest reigning Emperor of China, endorsing French wine. And of course, during the Qing dynasty, China started to recognize that it needs to open up and modernize. Arguably too little too late for the Qing dynasty. But certainly there was a push towards the end of the Qing dynasty to modernize. And there was a movement called the Westernization movement. So ultimately, this movement was not successful from the Qing government's perspective. But what was interesting for the legacy of the modern wine industry in China was that Zhang Yu, called Changyu in English, was founded in 1892 as part of this Westernization movement. So Changyu is still today one of the largest wine brand in China, and it was the first industrialized wine company founded in Shandong province in China. Right, so that was a very rapid tour of Chinese dynasties. But I also want to slightly mention about the winewares throughout the ages, right? So in fact, the Bronze Age of China was the development of bronze technology was very much linked to wine culture, right? Because wine used to be made as a tribute to ancestors and to heaven. So it was used in worship. And so you had to be very conscientious about how you make your wine and how you present the wine, right? So there was a huge range of different types of bronze vessels created for different occasions, for different wines, and for different ranks of people as well to enjoy it, right? So bronzeware, actually over half of Chinese bronzeware tend to be used for presenting wine or food or something to the ancestors or to the gods. And then, of course, down the ages, with the influence of the Silk Road, you had a lot of these interesting Western Persian influenced wineware that was popular in China. Here on the right, you see a wall painting, a wall mural of a Tang Dynasty princess. And here you can distinctly see a wine glass, a Persian wine pitcher. Right, so this is obviously for the service of grape wine, and that was clearly an influence of the trade between Tang Dynasty and the West, and the lasting legacy of the Silk Road. And this is a particular goblet that I love. It's called red in glaze, right? So here you can already see the shape of a wine glass being sort of a cup on top, which is, what you find typically with Chinese teaware or wineware. But here you have a stem, right? So clearly this has taken on influence from Persian through the Silk Road. So it's a cup with a stem, but also notice the red, the glazed red color. So that almost tells us that this wine, this cup is used to serve red wine, right? So it's mimicking with the glaze, the red color of the wine inside, right? So I think this is a very beautiful artifact. So, in fact, if next time you go to a museum and look at things from China, you will start to notice, especially the bronzewares, there will be a lot of the bronzewares which were used for serving wine, right? So do watch out for those in museums across the world, in fact. Right, so now we are up to the modern China. We fast forward again to the modern China and have a look at quickly the present date wine industry in China. So here we must talk about the reform and opening up, 改革开放, right? So with it, apart from Changyu Winery, which was founded in 1892, China also embraced two other large wine brands, homegrown wine brands, Dynasty Winery, which was a Sino-French and China sort of a joint venture, and Great Wall. Great Wall was tasked with making China's first dry white wine and the first sparkling wine, right? So Great Wall produced the wine almost to coincide with the reform and opening up of China. So if you look at today, the wine map of China today, you will notice actually wines are produced pretty much all over China. So if you see the green spots on this map, they indicate wine regions which grow the European Vitis vinifera varieties, right? So these are the wines that we would internationally recognize as modern grape wines, right? And the red dots are areas where Chinese indigenous grapes or crossbreeds between Chinese grapes and European wine grapes are being experimented, right? So that's a very exciting area for the future to watch, to see if any of these indigenous or crossbreeds would become more commercially successful. Right now, they are quite small scale compared to, if you see the green dots, the size of the dots are the relative size of the vineyard area. And of course, at present, the predominant winemaking grapes are the more traditional Vitis vinifera varieties. Right. So in conclusion, China is really a new old world wine region, right? So in wine, we tend to talk about old world to mean places like France, Italy, Spain, and new world would be places like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, America, right? But actually, we should also talk about new old world, places like Georgia, for example, Greece, Turkey. So these were all regions with very ancient winemaking traditions, but perhaps for the modern consumer, these are not regions which are the most familiar to us, right? So we are coming to rediscover these regions, and China would fall into that category as well. You know, China is also a country with a very ancient wine culture, but is right now enjoying a new renaissance, right? So I think we should sort of open our eyes to Chinese wines and look at it as a new old world region. Okay, so thank you very much. It's been a pleasure for me to talk to you today about Chinese wine history and culture. And next week, we shall continue and talk about the regions, Chinese wine regions. So hopefully we can all go on a virtual holiday around some of the most beautiful parts of China with beautiful sceneries, vineyards, great food culture, as well as the wines, right? So next Sunday, same time, 8 p.m., we shall be going through having a tour around China and look at some of the local delights. And my book, The Chinese Renaissance, if you want to find out more, will cover some of these topics that we talked about. So really, for me, writing this book is not really to catalog the wines of China. This is more a book that set the scene for us to get interested in China as a wine region. So it talks about culture and history more than it catalogs the wines available. So if you're interested in history and culture of China, or even just the customs, right, hopefully you will find something useful from this book. And I hope the book references throughout the slides might also guide you with your reading if you do want to learn more about it. So thank you very much. I shall leave there, and please feel free to contact me via social media or email, and we can open up now for some Q&A or just some general chats. Thank you, Jinzhao.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you. That's wonderful. Great talk. So I keep having smiles because when your talk really brings us back to the history, what we learned throughout the years from school. And it's fascinating, the wine facts, stories behind the history. That's great. And I'm trying to open the audio and video for the audience. So please feel free to switch on your audio, video, and we can carry on chatting. And I noticed that in the audience, Ming Yu, raise your hand. If you're still in the audience, please feel free to chat, or if you have any questions to ask Janet. And anybody else, just feel free to join us. I can see Rob there.
Bob, hello. You're back in the very beautiful surroundings. Yes, excellent. Great to see you.
Cambridge Club again.
Wonderful.
This is open again now. That's amazing.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Hello, Bill. Yeah.
How are you? Can I just ask to start with? You mentioned at one point this dish, this triple cooked pork belly dish.
Yes.
So it sounded like a very old recipe then. So that's a recipe that dates back a long way and people are making it today. It's something that...
Yeah, it's still very much enjoyed today. And well, we credit it to Su Dongpo. I'm not sure if he really invented it or not, but that's what we like to believe because it's a good story, because it's a great story, you know, because he's a multi-talented person, you know, he writes great poetry, he's a famous calligrapher, he was a politician, you know, he was a gourmand, he makes wine himself and he cooks very well apparently. Yeah, so he was really like a multi-talented person, so we like to attribute this dish to him.
Because what would you recommend to go with it? Do you think particularly? Well, is it a sweet dish or is it like
it does have a bit of fruitiness to it? Yeah. So it's I suppose the texture is triple cooked. It has part fatty bits, and it has the lean meat, right? So the idea is that it should melt in your mouth. You cook it for a long time, so the fat would impart a lot of juice into the lean meat portion, right? And the fat becomes almost, you know, it will literally melt in your mouth. So for a dish like that, you want a wine that can cut through the grease because it is quite a rich, decadent dish. So you want something that does have a bit of freshness to it, but also it's quite an intensely flavored dish. You know, it's aromatic, it's slightly fruity, quite a lot of soy sauce. So there's umami. So you need a wine with a bit of weight to counter a dish like that, right? So it can't be just too lightweight either. So yeah, fruity with good acidity with a bit of weight.
Sounds delicious. Yeah,
it's a very lovely dish. Yeah. Not to be had on a daily basis, but once it's delightful.
Is it associated with any particular festival or anything, or is any time?
Not so much a festival, but I suppose more with region, you know. So I suppose he invented it, I think, he was in Suzhou at the time, I think. Yeah, he was exiled to Suzhou. And then he invented this dish while he was there. So the emperor, when he found out that he was having a good time in Suzhou, then exiled him again to a place less comfortable. So yeah, he just, he had I suppose not a very successful political career considering his great talents. But he would make sure he enjoys life wherever he was. You know, he would enjoy poetry and food and wine. Yeah, and that's why he's a very much loved and celebrated figure.
Right. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, Bill.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. A friend of mine, he's two of the wines you recommended before, he's actually trying them with this guy that's really into top class wine. So he wrote to me on Friday, and it's two of the wines you've mentioned. So they're having them in the next week anyway. The white and the red, the white, the Longyan.
The Longyan, yes.
I can't remember which the red one was, but anyway.
Okay, great, yeah. We can talk a bit about that next week, maybe.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
Fantastic.
I was a bit late because actually tonight it was University Blind Wine Tasting Public Tasting tonight. So we just did that, which was nearly
Oh, wonderful.
Before this.
All right, great.
Yeah. So,
amazing.
I've got all these little samples still on the table because I had to escape.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
Are you keeping all right through this?
Yeah. So I did a little party earlier with some friends. I went to a party actually, and we did a bit of a Chinese wine tasting with Zongzi, right? Because it's Dragon Boat Festival. So we had Zongzi with some Chinese wines. That was really good fun. Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to send you a note because those people I'm bringing to Stratford in next April.
Yes, that would be great. Yeah, we should do something in Shakespeare's hometown. Chinese wine tasting in Shakespeare with Shakespeare sonnets.
Yeah, so that'd be good.
In the audience, we have Mr. Yu Peng with us with a video on. Mr. Yu Peng is the Minister Counselor of the Culture Department of Chinese Embassy in the UK. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Jin Zhao and Bill, and thank you very much for the introduction. And I think that it's a very informative, and for me, it's an eye opener. Yes, especially when you compare the development of the two civilizations, and in the same time, you trace back to the origin of the Chinese Ripuan. Very informative.
Oh, thank you so much.
And thought-provoking in a way. So thank you very much. Looking forward to maybe meeting everybody.
Yes.
when time is right.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'd like to wish it's a holiday. It's a holiday over the weekends in China, but actually the day is tomorrow. It's a boat festival.
Dragon Boat Festival. Yes.
Right.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's really.
And I read your book since I came to London, but it's the first time of the e-meeting on screen. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining.
Right.
Our pleasure. Yeah. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Yu Peng. And we can see that from Jenny's sharing and from the slides, Jenny's put lots of efforts into it. All the slides are very informative, thought-provoking, and also they are in 3 languages, English, Chinese, and Pinyin as well. It's very friendly for Chinese audience, friendly for English audience, and also for very friendly for those who are learning Chinese as beginners. Like my husband has been on Chinese beginner level for how many years? 16 years, still on beginner level. So those Pinyin are very helpful. And also I noticed one difference this time, and Jenny put lots of meanwhile into the that's a great thing to do because sometimes we look at Asian culture, look at Western culture, but when you put them together, you see so much differences and similarities and changes throughout the time. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Janet. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, like Mr. Yu Peng says, tomorrow is a special day. It's a Dragon Boat Festival, and it's a bank holiday in China, national holiday, the weekend plus tomorrow. And thank you everybody for joining us on the Sunday night. And from UK, some from America, not much from China because it's 4 a.m.
early in the morning.
We'd like to wish everybody still enjoy the rest of this Sunday evening, and everybody happy Dragon Boat Festival tomorrow. And next Sunday, same time, 8 p.m., and Jenny will carry on the wine talk with us. The topic next week will be Chinese wine regions from west, east to around Beijing area. So that's going to be another fascinating talk. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.